Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of America Uncanceled. We're seeing this border problem just explode, especially over the course of the last week, as daily illegal crossings are making records almost every day, almost every hour, to the point where you even have the major cities in these big broken blue cities, the leaders of these cities saying, hey, we just can't afford to put all these illegals up. We can't afford all the crime that's occurring because of all these illegals. Many of these mayors have either caused or inherited a much depleted police force because of all the insanity of the BLM protests. So our major American cities are in rough shape. And by the way, if you're a border community, a border state, states like Texas and Arizona, the costs in terms of lives, in terms of economic costs, are really, really tough on people. And in all of this, Joe Biden just is going to continue to do the bidding of the woke left leaders in his party who see the influx of immigrants, illegal immigrants, coming into our southern border as good politics because they're going to be able to, for instance, in the state of New Jersey, automatically be added to the voting rolls very simply with very little security, and these folks can become voters in these blue areas. So I guess I can understand why the politics might work for the Democrats, other than they're literally breaking down these cities that they run. Who better to talk about all this than Town Hall's great Julio Rosas, who's a senior writer there, who's a great friend of CPAC. Julio, do I have that right? And tell me what's on your mind.
I mean, yeah, you pretty much explained it pretty well in my view, because I mean, the border is what I always like to refer to as Biden's first mistake, because I mean, day one, he undid so many things that the Trump administration put forth or tried to implement during that time. And so I've always said that I find it hard to be shocked by this just because I've seen so much of it. But from what I've seen this past week in Eagle Pass, shocked me pretty significantly, because I was really able to see firsthand just how neutered Border Patrol has become under the Biden administration. When people in large groups were crossing the river, Border Patrol couldn't deter them. They
Yeah.
were simply on standby to prevent drownings, which is okay. That's good. You know, we don't want people, women and children to be drowning in the river. But what's a greater deterrent than that is what's a better way to avoid drowning? Well, just don't get into the river in the first place, and you have that by having a border patrol boat there. But they know that they are going to rescue them. That's all border patrol is going to do. So there's all these incentives that have been going on for a very long time, and I'll be honest and say that I thought the border crisis was going to be a bigger issue in the midterms. It was a issue, but now seeing this, especially this past summer, with all the cities and everyone being fed up with it, even in hardcore Democrat areas, I really believe that unless things radically change, which I don't think they will, by the next election, I think the border crisis is going to be number two or number three on people's minds when they go to the ballot box. And so this is, I mean, it's shocking to me just how much it's affected not just the border towns, but also all these, let's face it, sanctuary cities.
So
But it's going to get worse without any stop.
So Julio, always the problem with polling on a particular issue like the borders, it's so big, right? It's not just an immigration policy question. It's so many other things. It's about crime in your city and not feeling safe. It's about your economic prospects when someone who's here illegally can do a cut rate job than somebody who's gone through the system and maybe gotten certified. But you have this other issue, which we're spending a lot of time on at CPAC, and Mercy's spending a lot of time on, my wife, which is the center that we've created to combat human trafficking. Now, we're not the first people to talk about human trafficking. We're new to this fight, and there's been so many veterans who have been doing heroic work for decades on this topic. But the question that these two twin evils of trafficking and drugs, you could cynically think that, oh, we want these illegal immigrants because they'll become our voters. That's an awfully cynical approach to the border. But that is the Democrats' approach. But at the same time, they're destroying our kids with trafficking and drugs. What are you seeing in terms of those issues?
I mean, whenever you do bring up the issue of fentanyl and the rise in deaths, so, Democrats and open border advocates, they say, well, no, those are two separate issues. You have the people and you have the drugs; those are two separate things, and that's just absolutely nonsensical. Because I mean, it speaks volume that the cartels are making more money right now trafficking people or smuggling people than they are with drugs. I mean, drugs are just a bonus, right? So when you have a weakened security apparatus along our border, of course they're going to be able to bring in more drugs, not just through the ports of entry. And they say, well, most of the fentanyl and most of the drugs that are being seized are at the ports of entry. It's like, well, of course that's where most of it's going to be seized because you have the technology 24/7, you have the manpower 24/7. It's a control point. But when you have border patrol agents pulled off the line because they have to process 500 people
Yeah.
every hour, the cartels are smart. They are going to smuggle in whatever they want because the border's wide open. And it's not hyperbole to say that the border is open, especially in that regard. And we're not talking about giant sacks of marijuana that you have to have a very hard time going through the frontier. We're talking about fentanyl pills that you can fit 200-300 in a backpack and have a runner go through that gap. So they very much go hand in hand, and it's unfortunate because it doesn't need to be this way. Obviously, there's always unfortunately there's just going to be always issues pertaining to those problems. But right now, it's just got a giant gush of gasoline to that fire, and that's why it's the worst we've ever seen it in a very long time.
And what about trafficking? I mean, you have these terrible, horrific stories of, initially years ago they talked about all these minors coming to the border, and now you've seen this amazing, just growth in young people coming to the border with adults who aren't their parents, and sometimes without any documentation. I think most times without any documentation. They could claim someone as their child who isn't their child. Then you have this weird idea that like these young people are sent all around the country on these midnight flights into all these towns, which is what's helping to break all these towns. We don't know what's happening to these kids, do we? We don't have a good chain of custody on their safety. They say they care about them, but their actions don't show that.
No, no, and that's why the Department of Health and Human Services, which tracks unaccompanied minors, are almost 90,000 kids. They don't know where they are. I mean, the accountability of what happens to them after they get released to their sponsors, quote unquote, is very, very lackluster, to put it mildly. And so over 300,000 unaccompanied minors have come under the Biden administration. And so I think that number, that I think it's like 88, 85,000 that was reported earlier this summer, that certainly has increased in a couple of months, just because I mean, it's a numbers game, right? So yeah, they're working in factories, they're working in processing facilities, and those I say, unfortunately, those are the lucky ones, because the alternative, if they're missing, could be the fact that they're in sex trafficking, which is obviously a very prevalent issue here in the United States. And so again, they are doing this. Parents are willingly separating themselves from their kids in their country of origin because the Biden administration said if a child comes by themselves, we will not return them to their country of origin. I mean, what do you think is going to happen when you have the government say that? Of course. And so, I mean, just today we saw Border Patrol release news that they found a 2-month-old abandoned on the banks of the Rio Grande. I mean, 2 months old, and that's a daily occurrence. And just the other day, when I was in Eagle Pass with the fire department, we recovered a body that had drowned in the river. So I mean, there's just so many things that is what makes this crisis just one of the worst things that's happened recently in this country. Not obviously to the country itself, but also what's happening to these people that are responding to the incentives put forth by the Biden administration.
So, they're giving Donald Trump a huge political issue, a huge moral issue, quite frankly. Who was the famous person who said the other day that the first words out of Trump's mouth are going to be, "I was right." And I think that is right. They're giving him a huge kind of stick to hit over their head. So you have to ask yourself, and I want to ask you, Julio, do you think Biden thought that rescinding those Trump hard-fought victories on keeping people out of the country Do you think he regrets having done that? And there's no way for him to go back to reinstate these things because they were actually pretty complicated to get put into place in some of these international understandings. Do you think he regrets it, or are they so cynical that they don't care about the downside because they see the political upside? What's your take?
I think to a point they do regret it, but they're too far in to completely reverse course. I mean, Biden campaign on not building another foot of the border wall. They have since filled in these gaps. Obviously, they haven't done like a full-fledged project, but they've filled in these gaps because the Border Patrol has repeatedly, and DHS is like, hey, we need this, we need this, we need this. But even still, I mean, when you have, the White House press secretary just say repeatedly up until this past week or the week before, as thousands were pouring into Equal Pass, saying we've done more to address immigration, and we've been the most successful, which is just absolutely just crazy to even want. How can you even say that and go to sleep at night thinking that, like, yeah, I did a good job with that? So I think to a very small point they do kind of realize that this was bad, but they by doing anything remotely to do border enforcement and deterrence, they're just going to be automatically called by their side, by the radicals on their side, like, oh, we're just being just like Trump. You guys are being racist and all this other nonsense. And of course, they're beholden. They're beholden to that very vocal, radical part of their party. And I also just think that, yeah, there is a benefit to them. They see a benefit, right? I mean, they know that this is inhumane. They know this isn't orderly, and yet they're still doing it, right? So obviously, yes, I think there is a lot of political cynicism that either they themselves are personally benefiting from it, or they see that their side benefits from it.
Let me ask you this final question, Julio. These cartels are run by some pretty shrewd guys. It's not just the cartels. There are people coming here from something like 150 countries. They're coming. Everyone all over the world knows all you do is got to show up at our southern border, and we're not going to do anything. We're going to let you in. And so will the cartels throttle this back as we get closer to the election because they like Joe Biden being the president because he's so weak? Or is the thinking they got to jam the system and get everybody in they can because Donald Trump's going to win and then he's going to put the brakes back on. He's going to finish that wall and this is all going to stop?
I think the most likely scenario, and I hate forecasting elections. That's why I'm not a pundit. I'm more of the ground guy. But I can definitely foresee them definitely more putting the pressure on them. They say, hey, the election's coming up. If Donald Trump wins and he gets back in office, you're not, this is your final chance. So I think we will see more activity leading up to the election. And obviously, should Trump win, I mean, I think it's going to be a free for all up until January 20th. And so I mean, that's kind of what I saw at the beginning of Biden's term, because a lot of people thought, oh, Biden's in. Oh, so now, trying to get in as fast as possible. And of course, it wasn't necessarily like that. And that's why it took a couple months until March of 2021 till we really saw that increase that we've now just see on an everyday basis. So I think with the election, and obviously it's going to be, like I said, certainly a much bigger topic than before. I think we're going to see much more activity along the border in the months and weeks after it.
I hate to hear that, but you might be right there, Julio. We know that you know what you're talking about when it comes to the border and so many things. We're going to have you back on the show as we get through this really tumultuous time down there. And thank you for all the great work you and Town Hall do. We appreciate it very much. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to America Uncanceled. If you want to go see old episodes, just go to our website at cpac.org. You can see all the shows we've done. I don't know how many shows we've done. It's a lot. Some are better than others. Tell us the ones you like the best, and the guests like Julio you like the best. And, of course, you can download our show wherever you get your podcast. And the only apologies I have to make is that Mercy was not able to be with us today, only for one reason. She was having lunch with the great governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, her good friend and former White House colleague. She's doing a great job in the state of Arkansas, and we'll see you all soon. God bless.